I couldn't get him to go above 8mm. And of course, he would freeze up at the notion that anything was altered on the film, because this was his whole life. And in fact, I want to point out to you why this is such a hot issue with the critics, because people have invested their whole life in some view or other view of this case. Tink Thompson said when he went to Life magazine, he had this experience of looking at the absolute truth when he's looking at these frames. This is the truth. He was given this privileged position. He was on the staff. He was able to look at the truth about the Kennedy assassination. And to come back to a guy like that later and say, well, you know, this is not the truth. You're looking at a fabrication that was created by some people and they edited this out. They don't like that at all. It's a very hard thing for them to handle. I suppose it would be like if someone told me, well, the body wasn't altered. There's nothing wrong with the wounds. And I was turning, and it turned out that the Zapruder film was the truth and the body wasn't altered. I mean, it's that kind of thing. I know what that's like. I think that if somebody gave me that kind of evidence and it was really truthful evidence, I'd go where the evidence led. But a lot of people will not go where the evidence leads, and they fight it. And Grodin definitely fought it. He wouldn't give me anything above 8mm. So
it does fit. I'll show you in a moment. The film as a whole matches Dealey Plaza. There were some parts where I had to squish things together as tightly as humanly possible to make it fit towards the end of the film, and wasn't completely happy that it was a beautiful fit. But overall it does fit within the errors, and I find no background magnification and no magnification of Tony Foster either. Now we have what on my laptop in the file folder is actually called Frankenstein, because you have Jack's panorama here with the 1963 panorama over the top, and the Zapruder film turned into a panorama over the top of that, using the same tricks. I think I chose about 40 or 60 frames of the Zapruder film and did the same trick of stitching them together. Now up here, when you've got the start of the film, you see a couple of motorcycle ghosts and so on. They basically washed out. Down here, you see, if you keep seeing the limousine, because they're the frames I chose. There's no sharp edges. That's one of the tricks. You can make them blend nicely into each other with modern technology, and you have all of this. So this here, you'll see a bit of a blow up of this in a moment, but this part here is from the Zapruder film, including there's a little ghost panel up there, and there's a ghost panel. There's that guy down there under the sign, and there's the Texas, what's it, Texas 95? Sorry?
Texas Highway Department.
Texas Highway Department sign, you know, a little crest-shaped sign underneath on the pole. We'll come to the Stemmen sign in a moment. So you can sort of see the Zapruder frames. Not every single frame, that would have been too much work, but basically enough to get the whole film put together. So there's Tony Foster, not quite as tall as in Jack's version. You see where all the bystanders were standing. The ones that are moving, of course, are blurred because they appear in a couple of different frames. Down here was the toughest squash to get everything together. The tree, of course, is a little bit fatter than it was 40 years ago. But basically, even to the extent of the white wall and the bushes, and even around here, and then in the ghost images you even see Main Street. And then over here it comes back in the top. And down here you get a little bit of bushes, this bush here, and you get this grass in the ghost images. And apart from this guy, which is standing out like a sore thumb, everything fits. So this is what I'm telling you, that most of it seems to work very nicely, and even despite what some people thought, because of reasons I'll show you in a moment.
Is this basic problem, if you just view it from the standpoint of the car stop. And it's basically that, and I'm not trying to be mathematically accurate, this is just to make a point about a conception. Do you guys have a red pointer with a little, hole? The velocity drops to 0 if you believe these witnesses. And not only does the velocity drop to 0 momentarily, thanks. Sure. Thanks, I just pressed the, sure. Where is it? Okay. Not only does the velocity drop to 0, people kind of oversimplify this. They tend to think that, you know, you have this event, you can just cut it out and butt A against B. That's not the way it works. Because when you smooth this out, you've got to do a selection of frames, you might say, and you've got to smooth it out. And you've got to do a selection of the subset of what's already there. And I didn't make an overhead of this. I mean, is it G? Is it 2G? Could Mrs. Connolly take a half a G? I mean, I don't know. But pretty quickly you get to the point that when you solve for T, you're up into the area of 3.5 seconds to 7 seconds. I mean, you can't stop a 2-ton vehicle and then get back up to speed in less than 3.5 to 7 seconds. No matter what you have for your time, you have to double it because you got to get back up to speed. And suddenly you're dealing with 3.5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, and just roughly at 20 frames a second, you're talking about 160 frames, 200 frames. It's a very, very big deletion.
You get people that want to argue with everything. We want things that are, I'm sorry, I wrote this before I knew you were coming. I didn't want to steal your, is that trademark registered or something? Okay. It's a, well, I think it's a legal term, isn't it? Best evidence. And that's really what it is. And these guys made a lot of mistakes. And I tell David Mantic, in fact, this particular one, which is the only graph he published in Assassination Science, and I told him, look, it's wrong. And he said, fantastic. And you know you've got a real researcher, a real physicist, a real scientist when he says that. When someone finds something is wrong and he welcomes it, because what that means is we understand something a little bit deeper. Okay? Most people would say, no, I'm not wrong. I've published it, I've got to stand by it. There's two ways of doing it. One way is to correct the pincushion distortion and then measure it, and it's perfectly flat. Constant width all the way through. The other way is to just do the measurements and use a mathematical formula, and you get the same thing. And in fact, I'll show it here. Why I promised David I'd show this as well. You can see the way the pincushion distortion works. It's maximum over here, which is furthest from the centre. And if you look at that width there, it's coming in a fair way. I mean, this is one example where you can really see what's happening. The pincushion distortion compared to the centre of the frame, which you notice is not changing in size. Okay? It also makes these guys not quite so fat. So if they were worried that they looked really fat in the Zapruder film, I don't know if they're still alive, they actually get a little bit thinner because they're always in the sprocket hole area, and so they look quite fat.
Including Lyndon Johnson mentioned here. Lyndon Johnson began an affair with a woman named Madeline Duncan Brown in 1948. She bore him a son in 1950. This is not Lyndon's only child out of wedlock, but it was his only male offspring. And Madeline and I had over 100 conversations. I interviewed her at a national convention for the record on tape, and she is the real deal in my estimation. What she has to say fits with all the other evidence we know. And what is most important in capsule summary that she has to tell us is that she had a rendezvous with Lyndon on the New Year's Eve after the assassination at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas. And she confronted him with rumors rampant in Dallas at the time that he'd been personally involved. He blew up at her and told her that the oil boys and the CIA decided that Jack had to be taken out.
The polls